At this point, you should have designed your house, brought it into After Effects, and started breaking it down. Now we're going to start prepping it for animation. Some of these objects are going to be a little bit more complicated to animate than others. For example, the siding is going to be much simpler to animate than the door, because the siding is just a big rectangle, and the door has a bunch of little features on it. So even though we've broken up all these separate objects into layers, we're going to break certain objects down even more to make animating them even easier. To keep my composition as clean as possible, any object that will have multiple layers required to animate, I'll most likely be pre-composing. Pre-composing is something that we're going to deal with a lot in this project, and you can think about it simply as a way to group multiple layers together. So if I click on the upper window, I want to pre-compose this layer by going to Layer, then all the way down at the bottom, click on Pre-compose. This will pop open a window that will let me rename the new composition that we're creating. So I'm going to name this Upper Window Pre-comp. And then there are some more options that you don't really have to worry about at this point. Just make sure that Move All Attributes into New Composition is selected and press OK. Now you'll see that our shape layer has changed to a composition. And if I expand this a little bit so you can see the full layer name, we see that we have Upper Window Pre-comp just like we had named it. And if we look in our project, we have a new composition that's named Upper Window Pre-comp. If I double click on this composition, you see our new composition that just has our upper window layer in it, exactly as it was inside of our first composition. And you'll also notice that the new comp size is exactly the same as our original comp. I'll go back into my Upper Window Pre-comp, and now we can break this shape layer into multiple layers. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room to work, and then I want to change my anchor point so that instead of being at the center of the composition, it's at the center of my layer. The easiest way to do this is through a keyboard shortcut. It's Option, Command, Home, or Alt, Control, Home on a PC. Now if you're working on a laptop, you most likely don't have a home key. I'll undo by pressing Command or Control Z on a PC. You can do the same command by right-clicking on the layer, going to Transform, and then clicking on Center Anchor Point in Layer Content. And that just repositions the anchor point to the center of the layer's contents. That is one of the most handy keyboard shortcuts I have ever learned. Next I want to center my window inside of the composition. To do this, I'll come over to the Align palette. Now remember, if you don't have the Align palette open, you can find it by going to Window and clicking on Align. That disabled my window, so I'll click on Window, Align again to bring it back up. If you've ever used the Align palette inside of Illustrator, this works exactly the same way. You can align whatever you have selected to different points on the composition, or if you have multiple objects selected, you can change this to align to the selection. I want to center this in the comp, so I'll come to this button right here and click to center it horizontally, then I'll come to this button and click to center it vertically. Now, because the anchor point was centered inside of the layer, I know that the layer is perfectly centered within my composition. Now, the size of the composition determines what the bounding box is inside of our main composition. So even though the window is only taking up this much space inside of the layer, we have all this extra empty space that's still represented by that pre-comp. So I'll go back into my pre-comp, and I want to change the size to match the window a little bit more. So I'll go to Composition, Composition Settings, then I can move my window over, and then just scale down the width and the height until it matches the window a little bit better. This doesn't have to be perfect, the numbers don't have to be rounded, I'm just trying to get it as close to the size of the window as possible. I'm going to unlock the width and the height so I can change them independently, and scale down the width a little bit more, and then I'll give myself a little bit more height just so I have a little bit more room to animate. Once it's roughly the size of the window, I'll press OK, then I go back into my Comp 1, and now you can see that the bounding box is updated to the new size of the pre-comp. This will just make things a little bit easier to move around. And we don't have to worry about the positioning just yet, we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now if we go back into this pre-comp, I'm going to zoom in, and if you're using a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can move the wheel in and out to scroll in and out on the composition. So I'll just zoom in until I get to about here. We're zoomed into 200% at this point, so that's why the edges look a little bit fuzzy, but that's okay. Now I just want to break these three rectangles into three different shapes. There's no wrong way to do this. If you'd rather use solid layers instead of shape layers, feel free. For example, if I wanted to make a new solid layer, I would go to Layer, New, Solid, make sure that it's white, press OK again. Now I have a new solid the size of my comp. I could come up to the Mask tool and draw a mask, hold down spacebar to reposition it, and make it the size of my window, and that's one way to have the shape of my window. Nothing wrong with doing it that way if that's how you feel comfortable. If I get rid of my mask, I also could have just scaled this down to be about the size of my window. That's another perfectly acceptable way of doing it. I prefer to work with shape layers, so that's how I'm going to recreate this window. I'll delete this solid, click on my shape layer, and just like before, I'm going to duplicate the window, open up the contents, open up upper window, and select the first two objects and press delete. So I'm just left with the larger outside rectangle. I'll collapse this layer and rename it frame. Then I'll duplicate this layer again, bring it on top, open up the contents, delete the second two layers, rename this layer lower glass, and then I'll duplicate it one more time, bring it up, open the contents, delete the first and the last, and rename this upper glass. Now, if I disable my original layer, I have all three rectangles separated in different layers. Now this window is all set up for animation. If I come back out to my original composition, let's do the same thing for the lower window. I'll start again by pre-composing this layer by going to Layer, Pre-Compose, rename this lower window pre-comp, make sure Move All Attributes into New Composition is selected, and press OK. Now before we go into that new composition, I want to note that every time we make a new composition, our project structure gets a little bit messier. So at this point, I'm going to start organizing my files. If you come down to this icon, you can make a new folder in your project, and I'll name this Precomps. Then I'll select my two precomps and bring them into that folder. And I'm also going to take this opportunity to rename my Comp1 composition to House Build. And that way, down the line, when I have lots of different compositions, I won't get confused as to what's what. Now if we go into our lower window pre-comp, again, I want to center the anchor point with the layer, so I'll do that by holding Option Command Home or Alt Control Home on a PC. Then I'll go to the Align palette, click on the horizontal alignment and the vertical alignment, and then I will change my composition settings so that I can scale this down to be the size of the window again. Once I'm happy with that, I'll press OK. And then I'll break down this layer in the same way. And now I have all my different elements separated into multiple layers. Next, I'll do the door by going to Layer, Pre-Compose, rename it Door Pre-Comp, press OK. Go into that composition, center the anchor point, align to the center of the composition, and change the composition size. Press OK. And then because this has a little bit more detail to it, I'm going to zoom in on the door. I want to start by focusing on this window since it has a bunch of tiny little pieces. I'll duplicate the original layer and disable it, then go into the contents and find that set of groups that's just that window, and then I'll group those together and delete all the other groups so I can focus on just those elements. Now the way that I built this was by doing a half circle here for this base part, doing 3 different lines for the glass separations, and then another half circle for the outside frame plus the glass. So if I turn off the other groups, you can see that it's just a half circle with the fill color and then a stroke for the frame. Now the way that I want to animate this, I only need to break it into 2 separate layers. So I'll rename my layer to be Window, duplicate it, go into the contents, and delete everything except this little half circle, and then rename this Window Reveal, and then delete that half circle out of this first layer. So now I have 2 separate layers, one for the smaller half circle and one for the rest of the window. And we'll get into how I animate it a little bit later, but for now that's all I need to do. Then I can turn my original back on and break down the rest of the door. And now my door is separated in individual layers. Now the last object that we need to do this to is the lamp. So I'll select my lamp, Layer, Pre-Compose, rename it Lamp Pre-Comp, move all attributes, press OK, go into the layer, click on the lamp, Option Command Home, center horizontal, center vertical, and then change my composition settings, change the size, press OK, and then I'll zoom in and start breaking this down. And that's that.